I was in Northern Ireland in the 70s, bandit country. What did I know? I was an 18-year-old soldier. I was bulletproof Teflon. Nothing was going to hurt me.
So once you caught the Johnston, how many victims had he actually done that
I can't remember the exact number. It was 122 or over 10 years. I found myself in a position that I never thought would happen. I was the head of CID.
I mean, that Madeleine McCann case was probably the most high profile.
It's a classic example of nobody murder unless she's wandered off and gone off a cliff, and that wasn't the case. One of the biggest reductions in knife crime, death in London, is not the Met Police, it's the London Ambulance Service. Because of the immediate availability of the weapon, we end up with dead people. Should we take DNA from children at birth? We've got DNA from a crime scene. Can you tell us whether there's a match on the database? On promotion then I went to Scotland Yard as a commander and ran Homicide there, but I was also tied into a national group called the Homicide Working Group. I do not for a moment think it was the McCanns who did it.
Can you just say there's been a murder?
There's been a murder. Tiger.
Welcome back to the Criminal Connection podcast. My name's Terry Stone, aka The Podfather. This week we've got a very special guest, Mr. David Johnston. He was in the Commandos. He was a commander of Scotland Yard. He was also heavily involved in GCHQ and worked there for a number of years. And the icing on the cake was that he received a Queen's Police Medal from Her Majesty Elizabeth. God rest her soul. But thank you, Mr. David Johnston, for joining us. Please put your hands together for Mr. David Johnston. Way!
Thank you, Terry.
Give you a big introduction there, David, because I don't think we've had the honour of having anybody as highly decorated as you on the show. And I think a lot of our listeners and viewers be very interested in actually finding out a little bit about you, you know, where you grew up and how you sort of got on your career path, you know, from joining the army.
Gosh, yeah, interesting, Terry, yeah. Well, thank you for that kind introduction. Yeah. And I'm not sure that I can live up to all of that, but I'll try. So I was, you make your own luck in life, and I was just an average lad brought up in Glasgow from a working class family. At the age of 15, I saw a film at school about the army, and I came home and mentioned to my father, who'd been in the Scots Guards during the war. Yeah, I think I might be interested in the army. And I was down the recruiting office. So at the age of 15 years and 2 months, I found myself in the army in what they call boy service, which is a bit like a public school, I suppose, you know. Or private school.
Was that 16 or was that 18?
15.
Oh, 15, wow.
Yeah,
wow.
When you were allowed to do that, yeah. Back in 1972, that was. And so I did 2 years as a junior soldier in the Royal Engineers, and learnt my craft as an electrical engineer, and then a combat engineer, and then I volunteered for what they call special forces or special service, and I went and did the all-arms commando course and joined 3 Commando Brigade of the Green Beret to become a commando soldier, I think, at the age of 18.
Did you actually do the training in Limpston with the Marines?
I did, yeah.
Oh, so so it doesn't matter if you're in the army or the navy, you all train in the same.
Yeah. It's interesting because, of course, this is where you get the rivalry between the army commandos and the Royal Marines. We would argue we are the real commandos. Because if you go back to the history and, you know, Second World War, Winston Churchill was very keen to have this crack lightning force who could strike, and he sort of set up the commandos, and most of the training was done up in Spian Bridge and Inverness in Scotland and the wilds with daring do and daggers in the teeth. And, you know, this was the same time that David Stirling was forming the Long Range Desert Group in the Special Air Service, but the commandos had a slightly different role. It was more around supporting major actions like the D-Day landings and working behind enemy lines in smaller groups. And so the army were given the task of setting the commando spirit up. And by about 1950-ish, people were beginning to say after the war, do we need all of these guys with daggers in the teeth doing this? You know, we're at peace now. But nobody wanted to lose the esprit de corps of commando training. And so the Royal Marines took on the task. And the Royal Marines had been soldiers, if you like, naval soldiers on boats since 1600 and something. Sorry, guys, I can't remember the dates. And they were given the task to become commando trained. And so they took on the commando spirit and the Green Beret training. But very quickly, they realised that they needed support from teeth arms, as it was called. So engineers, gunners, and various army elements to do directed fire, to do mine warfare, to do beach surveys. And so the Army Commando Brigade was reformed again in the 70s, and that led to the development of a number of specialised commando units. And I was lucky to join one of those.
And what did you
5'9"
think?
Commando.
What do you think? What was it?
5'9" Independent Commando.
Right, okay. What do you think about the MP that recently come out and asked the Marines to justify their existence? I actually thought that was the most stupidest thing I've ever read in my life.
Yeah, well, again, that suggests perhaps a bit of naivety amongst a number of our politicians who have never actually held a real job and come out of university often and gone to school. I candidly, with respect, don't know what the history of that MP was, but it does suggest a certain level of naivety in such a dangerous world today, with what's happening in the Red Sea, what's happening in Yemen, what's happening in Israel, what's happening in Ukraine. I mean, we just can't get enough well-trained people into our military, and that's half the problem, is that, we're in a competitive market, and a lot of people are saying, I'm not sure that's the job I would like to do. Same with policing, it's very difficult to get recruits into policing these days.
Well, funny enough, I was having this conversation with somebody the other day, and, people said, there's not enough police on the streets. Why is there a lack of police? And, if you think about it, whatever they get paid, 30 grand, 40 grand a year, whatever it is, to actually put your life on risk, in a job, lots of people, I think you have to kind of make it a little bit more attractive financially to get people to actually want to take that.
You do, but it's a bit like joining the military, though, I think, Terry. People don't join the police or the military or the civil service to make money, because if you do, you're in the wrong profession.
Absolutely.
It's about public service and giving something back. And that might sound pretty cliche to some people now, but actually it's the same with the National Health Service. People who are doctors and nurses do it because they love being able to help and give something back. So I think...
But don't you think they should... my personal opinion is they should get more for what they do. I agree with you on the public service point, and I do agree that, if they wanted to be rich, they wouldn't do it. But I do think for what they do, and this is just my personal opinion, I just think they should get paid a little bit more to incentivise them to because it's also unsociable hours. If you're in the army, you could be away for 3 months. If you're in the police force, you'd be working Christmas Day. It's not like a normal job where you kind of work Monday to Friday and then.
No, I know, I agree with you, and of course I'm never going to my serving colleagues and ex-colleagues would never forgive me if I said I didn't agree with that. I do agree with that. And of course, it's trying to find that balance. And, we hear the stories about train drivers that are on strike that get, 70 grand a year for driving a train, responsible job. But
they're having a tough time at the minute, though.
Yeah, they are. They are. But, somebody was telling me just today that they've got, I don't know, X number of applicants for each job when somebody wants, because people are going, this looks like a good number and the money's good. Yeah. But I do agree there should be some representation about people who are in the, health service, who are in policing, who are in that front line, the ambulance, fire brigade, who are actually putting their life at risk, and there should be recognition of that. I guess it all comes down to how much the public are willing to pay for that service. Yeah. So it is difficult. The military, the police are in a difficult position. They're a necessary evil of society. We need people to police us. We need people to protect us from existential threats inside and outside of the UK, and that's what these people do. And they're there when nobody else will be. Yeah. Whether it's supporting civil authorities in floods or sending people abroad to Iraq, Afghanistan, and other trouble spots. I'm completely with you, and there should be a fair.
Yeah. I wonder. I mean, I could be completely wrong, but I do think if there was a better incentive, I think people might consider. If it's like weighing up your options, isn't it? If someone says to you, you can sit behind a thing and press a button all day and get 65 grand a year to be a train driver, you're going to go, well, I can do that or I can do that. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I do think people do, especially now. It might be different, 10, 20 years ago, but I think now people are driven by money and they are thinking. And as an example, we needed a little bit of work done. It was a little bit of building work. It wasn't like a massive job. And it sounds like a cliche, but we had one guy not turn up. Yeah. The other guy did turn up, and he was a typical builder. Yeah, he had his arse on show.
a big, sort of belly. And he was like, oh, yeah, a couple of days, it'd be $1,000 or whatever. And you're like going, I don't think it didn't. Is that? And then a Polish guy come round and was like, £150, I'll do it now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So obviously the Polish guy got the job.
Yeah, of course.
And it just seems to be that, and I don't know if it's a British thing, but it seems to be that, or maybe it's just a worldwide thing where people are a lot less reluctant to work and they're all looking for a way of doing the least amount of work for the most amount of money.
Well, I agree. I mean, you're a podcaster, and so social media, I think, demonstrates to young people today that they should be able to have everything and they should have it right now and they shouldn't have to get their hands dirty or do a manual labour job to do that. And of course, that can be for the very special few, whether you're a Clint Eastwood. That shows my age, doesn't it? But
he was great. He's a great actor, amazing director.
Yeah, but not everybody can, and you'll know from your life how many actors are struggling and out of work because they've got a passion for it, but they just can't get the break. And I think social media sets us up in some ways to cause that malaise in society that people think everything should be easy and they should be entitled to a living rather than have to earn it.
What I find,
life's not like that.
What I find telling is when you hear or you read or watch any of these people that run these social media platforms talking about their platforms and they ask them that question, do you let your kids on your platform? And they all say no. And that's also quite telling. It's sort of like, well, why? But I think social media is a great it's a great tool, but I think it's there is a darker side to it, and I think people have used it to try and harass people. People have used it to groom kids. People have sort of met. I'm sure people have set up dates on there, and then people have met up, and then there's somebody else there. I'm sure there's been people probably killed. I mean, I know one person who was playing, I don't know if it was Call of Duty or one of these games online, and got friendly with somebody, and they said, "Oh, why don't you come meet me?" And then he went round the guy's house, and the guy killed him.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. I do a bit of lecturing at Jesus College at Cambridge, and one of the subjects I was talking about there recently was crime in the metaverse. So what's the metaverse? Well, the metaverse is the internet, but it's this latest version that we're seeing, what they call Web 3.0. So what does that mean? Well, it means that it's a more immersive experience. And so there have been, for instance, cases where women have gone in to virtual reality games with a headset on as an avatar, and within 2 or 3 minutes of being there, found themselves being attacked and somebody sexually assaulting their avatar, and they've had to rip the headset off. And so there's a question then and a dilemma now in society: does that equal a real crime? And if it doesn't, if it does equal a real crime, how do you investigate it? What's the jurisdictional issues? Who's responsible for it? Try reporting that at a police station.
I mean, it's I kind of can't. I remember reading about that.
Yeah.
And I think somebody said that they'd been raped in the metaverse.
Yeah.
And you sort of think, well,
you haven't.
I don't actually understand how that's possible. And also, I mean, my understanding is, and I'm not massively techie, right? But my understanding is these avatars, they walk around and you walk up to your avatar and you type a message, yeah? So I don't know whether the message was inappropriate, but if you go on social media, every day you get inappropriate messages.
No, it's more than that now. The avatars can actually interact with each other on some of these platforms. And so there's another dimension to this. So for instance, the development of haptic suits is a new dimension for the metaverse.
I don't even know what that is. Right. Can you educate me?
So a haptic suit is an extension of a 3D virtual reality headset.
Okay.
You wear it as a suit, and it's got pressure points in it. It allows you to feel your connectivity to other people. So does that mean then if somebody then assaults a man or a woman, whoever it may be, in the metaverse, that they're guilty of a physical assault or a sexual assault if they've touched them sexually? And if so, how do you manage that process? Because they've entered into it willingly, and it's happened in the metaverse.
It just sounds crazy, doesn't it? It's just mad.
But these are the dilemmas that we're facing, and one of the other. I know we kind of drifted away into policing, but that's one of the other challenges that policing is now facing. Is that in terms of numbers, in terms of when I joined in the 70s, It wasn't quite Dixon of Dock Green, although let's remember he was shot dead where armed robbers crossed the forced boundary in a Ford Granada or whatever it was with shotguns. So this was about the beginning of regional crime squads and the need for us to act more than as a provincial force. And here we are now with cops having people coming in. And I spoke to an academic recently who spent his whole life, a very intelligent man, lost £500,000 or thereabouts of his life savings and his pension in a crypto scam.
Right.
So here's another example of where what we're seeing, the value of the internet, but the dangers of the internet. Now, the flying squad in London dealt with what we called over the pavement jobs, robberies, where there might be 500 grand or even £1 million at stake, and we put a whole surveillance team out.
Yeah.
But a guy comes in now and reports to the action fraud team in the City of London, I've had £500,000 stolen, and he's lucky if he gets a crime number.
Wow.
And nobody's going to investigate it because nobody's got the resources to do it. And so there is a whole disconnect, I think, between the emerging types of crime that we're seeing with technology and the ability of the National College of Policing and individual police forces to meet that demand.
Yeah, I think the problem,
there's no easy answer.
I think the problem is with the crypto. I remember in 2012, 2013, someone was talking to me about Bitcoins, and I was like, "What is a Bitcoin?" They said, "Well, it's this digital currency, and you put it in the wallet." And I said, "It all just sounds like a load of bollocks to me."
Yeah.
And they went, "Oh no, you got to buy them. It's the new thing." And I think at the time then, and I could be getting the dates wrong, but it was like 90 cents or $1, right? And I think obviously that then went up to, I think at the top it was like $69,000. So so per Bitcoin. So obviously for the man on the street, the man on the street is about somebody buying a Bitcoin for 90 cents and then it's worth 69 grand. Everyone thinks it could be me. Do you know what I mean? And I know there's lots of companies that have tried to use cryptocurrency for good things, but then I know there's lots of people who have literally just set up a cryptocurrency. They've gone out and gone, right, there's nothing to this. We're just going to get everybody to buy it, and we're gonna sell it. We're going to pump it up to $2 or $3. Then we're going to sell it, and then literally just go with the money.
But this is, and we shouldn't be surprised at this because, of course, criminals are entrepreneurial and they can move much more quickly than law enforcement and government agencies because they're not required to have health and safety and legislation and take account. So they can just move. I'll give you an example. Years ago, we had a couple of lads from Liverpool, a couple of Scousers, who went round knocking doors selling fresh turkeys for Christmas. And people paid a deposit. It was a £5 or something, I think. This was when I was in Bristol, as a cop in Bristol where I started. And then just before Christmas, they'd come round and they had one turkey. And it was alive. And of course, they come to the door and say, "Here's your turkey." And cops are going, I don't want that. I don't want a live turkey. I'm not going to kill it. And so, well, you can't have your deposit back. And off they go. And of course, they do that to about 50 or 60 people and make their money. And they had no intention, obviously, of getting rid of the turkey. So there was a scam.
So that was a turkey scam, right?
Turkey scam.
No, I don't know anybody who's ever. It's a great story, right? So it's not just crypto. It's not just. But
criminals move on, and that's what I think. My point is that now they see there's easy money to be made, and why go over the pavement with a shotgun with salt or bullets in it when you can actually do it online and nobody's going to follow you or catch you, and there's going to be no flying squad. We haven't got a digital flying squad that's ready to pounce on these people. And of course, you've got the whole issue, what we used to call the crime triangle: victim, location, and offender, and they would all be related. So now the victim could be in London, the offender could be in Korea or Estonia or Russia, and the location's somewhere in the metaverse. So who's got responsibility? Who takes ownership? What's the jurisdiction? What entitlement have we got to go into that jurisdiction to arrest somebody or detain them or to recover the funds? And so these are all hugely ponderous questions that nobody has got an easy answer for. And there's a Vienna Convention on cyber crime and cyber legislation that's tried to unpick some of this. And a very clever QC, a guy called Dean Armstrong, who's written a book about this recently, about cyber, a good friend, Dean. These are really difficult issues, but it's the emergence of this technology and the gap that's now taking place between conventional policing resources and our ability to meet the requirements of people moving forward. It worries me because I don't know how we're going to bridge that gap quickly. We're turning into becoming a registry service that registers complaints, but there's nobody available to deal with them.
I think one of the scariest things for me as a citizen is, and I read this the other day, and I just thought, wow, this is actually quite scary. People don't realise how reliant they are on the internet and their telephones. And if there was ever a cyber attack which took out, the internet or stop your phones working, that would be a doomsday scenario, because you wouldn't be able to pay for anything. You wouldn't be able to contact anybody. I mean, in the old days, I remember we had a phone at home, and that was it.
Yeah.
And if you didn't, if there was no one at home, you had to ring back.
Or you didn't pay the bill, you couldn't make a phone call. Well, and that's where, again, entrepreneurially, criminals have moved into ransomware. So I had a client privately. Which one shall I use? I've had one as a well-known musician who was cyber attacked, had all of his passwords stolen, potential to lose his whole back collection of albums, and wasn't really sure how to go about remediating that. On the other side of it, a young woman who ran a flower shop who found that her computer system had been hacked. She received a ransomware demand that shut down her computer, so she couldn't get at her accounts, she couldn't get any of her receipts, she couldn't get at her client base. So her business was completely screwed unless she paid ransomware in cryptocurrency, ironically, to get money back. Now, what the criminals are very good at doing, they're very good at making sure that if you pay them, they will release your data, because that has to be the business model. If they take
there
the
is
money,
honour amongst
they're
thieves.
honor amongst thieves. But this is where we're seeing people moving away now from why smuggle heroin. Of course, it still happens, but when you can actually steal millions or hundreds of thousands at a time from unwitting people and older people. Saw a really good movie last night actually with Jason Statham called The Beekeeper. You got to go and see it, and that's exactly what happens. He's an old lady he knows, and she gets ripped off looking after the accounts for a number of charities, and they steal a couple of $1 million from her. His response is more than perhaps conventional policing. It involves a lot of killing and burning and arson. But
I mean, the only good thing about that, David, is I won't do it again.
and therein is the moral. I'm not condoning that, but
yeah, of course.
I think we're living in changing times, and I think I mentioned to you earlier, Terry, this DNA issue. There's another example. Technology. When I started in policing, all we had was fingerprints and blood. You could test people's blood type. Then along came DNA, and we had a number of notable cases where people's DNA was used, and DNA has exponentially developed over the last 10 years, where they can now tell markers for ethnicity. They can tell what area of the world people came from. They tell their hair colour, their eye colour. There are a whole host of things, some of which we used in Operation Minstead in the Met, which was looking for a gerontophile. A gerontophile is a person who rapes elderly people.
Sorry, say that again. What's it called?
A gerontophile.
A gerontophile?
A gerontophile.
I've never heard of that.
Well, there we are.
Wow.
Yeah, don't get me into other phobias about people that dress up as furniture. And
right.
But
how do you identify, David?
Yeah. But we had loads of DNA left at crime scenes of this guy. He'd raped over 100 elderly women across the whole of the southeast region over many years.
Wow.
But what we didn't have was he hadn't been arrested, so his DNA wasn't on file. And there were a number of other highly notable cases that were serial killers and so forth that we were looking at. And I'd written a paper asking a question of society, not saying we should do it, but should we take DNA from children at birth in the UK? And you get into arguments about, privacy and so, but not for the police. It should be an arm's length database, not controlled by the police, but where the police with a warrant or a judicial review could go there and say, we've got DNA from a crime scene. Can you tell us whether there's a match on the database? And of course you can get familial matches now. So that's one thing. You would start to solve a lot of crime. The second thing is we don't take DNA from people when they die. So there's no way of cleansing the database.
Right.
And the more crime scenes the police attend, the more samples they put on the database. So it's probably up to about 1 million now. It's around 700,000 when I was there.
Was that, and when you're talking about that, is that unsolved?
That's unsolved. So that's DNA which has been recovered from the scene of a crime, a rape, a burglary, a robbery, a kidnap. It could be anything.
Yeah.
And the DNA sits there saying, this is who we think the offender was. Because it's not definitive unless it's in a rape case and it's, internal to the victim or something where it's, it's fairly compelling evidence. But it could be DNA left at the scene, broken glass or a robbery or a burglary, and so forth. So we've got nearly 1 million samples, I would say, now on the database. We don't know who they are because nobody's given their DNA in the past. Now, if we had taken DNA from babies at birth, we would be able to solve perhaps 80 or 90% of that. Of course, it wouldn't include people who are illegal immigrants into the country, people who were here illegally, people who were here on holiday. I understand all that. But what it would do is it would solve probably a significant number of those crimes.
I think the death thing makes absolute sense because they're dead anyway. But if everybody around the world did that, then like you said, and I suppose for any police force anywhere in the world, they want to tick off the boxes, right? If they've got all these unsolved crimes, they want to be able to go, right.
Well, it's more. It's not even for the police. For me, it's more about the victims. So if you've got a lady who's been raped, an old lady who's in her 80s, and the offender said, "If you tell the police, I'll come back and kill you," and that happens, at least you could go back to her if you hadn't solved it and say, "Look, what we can tell you is that the guy who attacked you is dead. We can't tell you who he is because of data protection laws and the fact that he hasn't had a trial, but we can tell you he's never coming back because he's dead, and we can tell you that." So wouldn't that be a good thing?
I think it would. I agree.
So, and then that way you could start to parse this database so that you get rid of a lot of the stuff that's on there and you don't have to keep looking at it, and you could keep it. It also helps to prove people innocent. There have been lots of cases where DNA has proved people innocent. The case in Liverpool recently where a guy was released after 10 or 15 years, I think it was, where he'd served time for a crime that he clearly hadn't committed. So my view is the question society needs to ask is, should we be using technology where we've just been discussing some of the dismerits or the problems with it in the cyber world? Here's a way where we could help to make society safer. And then you get arguments about, what happens if insurance companies then start to use this data to say, you've got a higher chance of having a cancer than I have, and therefore your premium is going to be more expensive. Well, let me tell you, that's already happening. So there are DNA companies out there now who offer you these kits, and they can take your DNA. You have very little control of the data once they've done that. And there are other moral dilemmas coming out of that in the commercial world. So they then write to you and say, did you know you've got a sibling? And that's what happens. I know people who have had this happen. And then you go, oh, my mother never told me about this then. So she's had an affair and she's had a child before that I didn't. So you've got all of these moral dilemmas. And at the moment, there is no regulation. These commercial companies are doing it. So my view is that the way you stop that is you would regulate it and you would have an arm's length organisation that the police or other agencies could apply to with the correct proportionality, justification and necessity to look at that material. And since 1953, we've been taking heel prick tests off of babies and holding the biological sample from every baby in the country anyway. And all I'm saying is you could share in that.
But what's that used for?
That's used and has been used since the 1950s to look at the spread or the reduction of infectious diseases like measles, polio, and other horrific things. And that data has been used, and the sky hasn't fallen in Chicken Licking, and there hasn't been this great big that people would worry about Big Brother ruling the world. Yet that data has been held quite safely for 60, 70 years. So what I'm saying is you could use the same biological data. You don't need to take it. You could use that, convert it to DNA, which is the newer technology, look for infectious diseases, have that sample available to be checked against crime scenes, to check when people die. And the other thing is when you have disasters like the tsunami that we had in Southeast Asia, we had hundreds of people being brought back and the bodies weren't in a fit state to necessarily be identified physically, and DNA had to be taken. But there was the legislation hadn't been written to allow the national DNA database to be used for that purpose. So they've had to review the law on it. So, there are a number of ways now in modern world where people travel and with technology where we, I think, should be looking at how we exploit that. And of course, it would save the police and the public a fortune.
I think the problem though is there's a lot of conspiracy theorists, which are not anti-government, but they think that everything the government does is to watch them or whatever. And I think if that went out, let's do this, you'd have them all going, oh, you just want my DNA because you're going to clone me or whatever. And there was a lot of stuff. I remember when the pandemic happened, and people were getting the vaccines, and people were saying, "Don't get the vaccine because Bill Gates wants to put a computer chip in you," and all this stuff. And I remember, and this was a joke, right? This wasn't me being serious. But when I went and got a vaccine with my wife, the nurse said, "Oh, have you got anything you want to ask me?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Once you've injected me, will Bill Gates be able to track me and listen to my conversation?" She went, "Yes, absolutely." And I said to my wife, "I told you it was true." But you know, I think when you get these debates, but I do actually, there is sense, because a lot of people are in jail that are no doubt innocent, and there's a lot of people that aren't in jail that are no doubt guilty. So I think by doing what you're suggesting, it levels the playing field, and it means that, you know, it couldn't be abused. But if it was accessed, then people could go, "Oh, we got a match," and then it's like, okay, well, we can solve this crime, or actually that guy can walk out of jail, or that woman can walk out of jail because the DNA says yes or no.
Point. DNA is agnostic; it neither proves guilt or innocence, but it is a tool that can be used along with other measures to help to do that. And
when did they first start using DNA? Was
1993, I think it was, somewhere around there. I can't. Wow. You know, there are a couple of.
So it's fairly new, really.
It is, and of course, the development has been massive. As I say, they can now tell things like, you know, ethnicity and you know. So we knew that the guy who was raping these elderly women was light-skinned black male with parentage or heritage from the Windward Islands of the Caribbean, and so, you know, I mean, here, one of the ironies I had with this is the Black Police Association accuses us of racially profiling because we were putting black people to the top of the persons of interest list. And I said, look, don't be ridiculous. Of course we're doing that because the science is telling us these are the people we should interview first. We're not saying they're guilty. What we're saying is they fit the profile. And it doesn't matter whether that's fingerprints or facial recognition. What we're doing is we're just prioritising people based on what the science tells us.
And when you caught that person that was doing, was it the genophile?
Gerontophile.
Gerontophile. That's a new word I've learned today. I'm going to use that. So once you caught the gerontophile, how many victims had he actually done that to?
I can't remember the exact number. It was 122 or something like that across the whole of the.
And how long did that go on
for?
Over
10 years. And the profile fitted him. He was of that description. He was actually caught because he'd been involved in a fight and he worked at a pub or a fight that had taken place at a pub. And the police had been called and he'd been arrested and his DNA was taken, and it was a uniform cop that took his DNA and submitted it to the database, and they got a hit, and that's how he got caught. So all of the great detective work we were doing, you know, yes, he was in the database and at some stage they would have come to him, but you know, it's not rocket science and there is no silver bullet here. You know, detecting crimes like that are very difficult, particularly when the guy was forensically savvy and was wearing boiler suits and gloves, and you know, he left his DNA at the scene, but other than that, it was very difficult to pin him down.
So if he left his DNA at the scene, what was the point of wearing the gloves and the?
Well, because he obviously knew his DNA wasn't on file, so it didn't concern him.
So he didn't wear gloves, or
he did wear gloves, but he left his DNA. But arguably wearing gloves would have been no different if his fingerprints weren't on file either. I get your point. But he was forensically aware where he didn't want to leave anything which would, you know, allow the police to link him very easily. So he kept his face disguised. And so it was over a period of time that the description of him got built up from speaking to multiple victims, all of who would see some different aspect of him.
But I suppose going back to your original point, David, if that DNA was on the database and that first rape had happened, he'd have been nicked. So 121 people or whatever it is wouldn't have been raped because of that.
Correct.
And put through that trauma. And
that feels to me to be a good thing.
Absolutely.
You know, so I think, you know, that's one example I think of where technology can.
And when he was nicked, and you know, what did he have a reason for doing it, or was he just fucking nuts, or was he just twisted, or?
No, he's never really accepted that, and
he said it wasn't me.
Yeah, never given full disclosure, no comment.
Wow.
And that's often the case with these people, and of course there are lots of crimes like that where people go to jail and never admit to the crime or won't admit the real reason behind it. There are others who, of course, will say it was because they were left in a wet nappy as they were kids or whatever the psychological damage was. And I don't underestimate that. In a number of cases, people have been treated appallingly as children, and we know that there's a whole history of people who have been abused, become abusers, and so forth. But
there's definitely a link to that where people have had a sort of messed up or fucked up sort of upbringing. They can quite easily go down that road.
Yeah.
Wow. And then, you know, obviously we did jump ahead with this policing stuff. But if we just step back, and obviously when you was in the commandos, did you actually see any action, or was you just basically trained? And
yeah, no, I mean, action. Yeah, I was in Northern Ireland in the 70s when it was all a bit, you know, places like Crossmaglen and Forkhill and Armagh, where they called it bandit country. But, you know, what did I know? I was an 18-year-old soldier. I was bulletproof Teflon. Nothing was going to hurt me, you know, and we loved it. That's what we joined to do, you know, was to do that. And then I got involved in a bit of a phony war that they had when people won't remember this, but Belize, which was a British dependency, was given its independence, and Guatemala had said that they were going to take over Belize because it was a pathway to the ocean, and they were landlocked and they needed this pathway to the ocean. So we got sent out there to as a show force, really, to say to the Guatemalans, if you come in to Belize, then you know you're going to get your ass kicked. And, then a diplomatic solution was found to that. So yeah, other than that, though, yeah, it was a lot of training
and how long was you in the commandos for?
So I joined 72 and I left in 79, so 7 years.
Wow.
And joined the police.
And did you know that you wanted to go into the police, or did you just think?
No. So I got to the stage, I think, Terry, where I was married at that stage, and married young, and was looking for something that was more settled, because you know your comment earlier about you're away sometimes for 3 months. Sometimes you didn't even get a chance to tell your wife. You know, I had crazy situations where I had been in Belize, in sunny climes of Belize, came straight back and got sent to Norway on winter training without any winter kit. You know. And all this kind of thing. So at the time I was leaving, I think Merlin Rees was the Defence Secretary in 78, 79 under Labour government, and it was there was a lot of disquiet in the military because the money was dreadful, and the conditions were pretty dismal. And I probably got to the stage where I thought, I've had enough of this now. I want to go and do something. And my brother was a cop in Strathclyde in Glasgow, in City of Glasgow Police. He said, well, why don't you join the police? And it was as simple as that. For me, it was a pathway from one uniformed service to another.
And where did you go?
Well, my wife is from the Bristol area, so I applied to Bristol City. Well, it was even in Somerset. It had just become even in Somerset police on amalgamation. So I applied to even in Somerset. Never entered my head that they wouldn't take me because if you had an arm and a leg in each corner, and you were in. I do remember there was a lad in front of me actually when I was going in for this final interview, who was school age, and he'd obviously just done his A-levels or something, and I was there as an ex-soldier. And this lad came out, and they must have asked him some questions about, limited around what he'd done as a schoolboy and before he was applying. So the first sort of question that one of the senior officers asked me, he said, "So what do you know about the Nile Delta?" And I said, well, I know it's not, and even in Somerset, but, and I think it was just he was reflecting on the previous questions. But it never occurred to me, that it was, that I wouldn't get in, not because I was arrogant, but just I think it was at that stage, it was that kind of a job. They wanted ex-military people, and they wanted people with a bit of life experience. And so I joined even in Somerset, and after my first 2 years, I went into the CID and the robbery squad, and had my ups and downs with the bosses, and spent 14 years as a detective.
I bet some people come unstuck when they try to run away from you, and you were like, I could do this all day.
Then, I was fit then. My pack was on my back, not on my front. But and it was great. I loved it. I mean, it was great fun. And I kind of realised by the time I was about 29, 30 that unless I did something to sort of show that I could do joined up writing, then I was going to stay because at that stage we were in the 80s, we were getting all this management by walking about and all these National College of Policing type things, and people had to have a degree, and so I went off and I did some A-levels at college, and I'll tell you a funny story about that. I did English and law, And I remember going into the English class for my first class as a 30-year-old surveillance officer, coming out of a drug squad car and going in. And there was a load of failed A-level students who had failed their A-levels and were now going back, in their own time to college. And I can still remember the teacher telling me, or asking me this question. She said, "You've just joined us, David. We've been reading this poem called The Thought Fox." And I've no idea who it's by. You can look it up. And it's about a fox jumping about in the snow, and these people are looking out a window at it. So, of course, she said to me, what do you see in this poem? I said, it's about a fox in the garden. And, of course, they're all laughing like that Smash advert, with the little robots that used to
that's
on
brilliant.
the telly.
Love that.
Falling off their seat. And she was telling me it was about alliteration for, some metaphor for something. And I thought, I'm screwed here because I've got no idea. Anyway, you do and you dig in. And eventually I learned how to pass the exams. And I went off and I did that. I did a master's degree at university, and that kind of changed the job's view, and they gave me attachments to what I call the joined up writing department, to what we call corporate development, doing strategy work. Yeah. And of course, the great advantage I had was I had 8-10 years at that stage of being a frontline cop and a detective. So my view was policy and strategy should reflect what's needed on the ground. So it's easy to write it because you say, well, what do we need to do, rather than some highly technical thing that means nothing to anybody on the ground. And so I quite enjoyed that. Yeah. And then you get involved in management, and I found myself in a position that I never thought would happen. I was the head of CID and Special Branch in Somerset, the Detective Chief Superintendent. And, that for me was, when I joined, the Detective Chief Superintendent was God. If you had to go and see him, you were either in the shit or you'd done something really good.
And when you talk about obviously being the head of the, the CID and did you say it was a regional flying squad?
No, that was even in Somerset Police. So I was the head of the CID for the whole force. Okay. So I had all the criminal investigation department. Yeah.
And when you did that particular job, was and you was sort of catching these sort of people that were up to no good. Did you sort of have a regular sort of thing? Because like when people do a job, they kind of get a way of working things out. And were a lot of the crimes that you investigated, was a lot of it done through intelligence, or was it done through police work, or was it done through DNA, or was it the question I'm asking really is, did you have there's a murder, this is what we do, there was sort of different things, and pretty much whatever happened, it always led you to the same.
Yeah, when I moved on promotion, then I went to Scotland Yard as a commander and ran Homicide there, but I was also tied into a national group called the Homicide Working Group. And the Homicide Working Group were responsible for developing the Murder Investigation Manual. So there is such a thing. Right. MRSAP, it's the Management of Major Incidents. I can't remember what MRSAP stands for. Management of, major incident rooms, how to run a major incident room. And then there's a murder manual that tells you how to investigate a murder. And
can I ask you just one quick question, David? Yeah. Can you just say there's been a murder?
There's been a murder. Taggart.
Did you do that? They ring you up and you'd be like, you're not going to believe this. There's been a murder.
Yeah. I used to get called Taggart when I was working in St. Paul's in Bristol. Right.
I take it you had a sense of humour about it, though.
Oh, yeah, of course I did. Right, yeah. Of course I did. So, there is a kind of manual that tells you, that you can go A to Z of this is what we've got to do. Now, none of that's necessarily going to solve a murder.
Got it.
But what it is going to do is give you direction, routine, and a process to follow that can be reassuring. Because being a senior investigating officer in SIO can be quite daunting when and we had a phrase that we used to use, which is that to investigate the death of another human being is the greatest honour a police officer can be given. And I think we genuinely believe that. We used to have that as a mantra at the National Senior Investigating Officers Conference. And so, yes, there was a methodology that you followed. Yeah. I quite enjoyed both the investigation side of that and the management of the investigation, because, of course, these things can cost a lot of money. And you've also got to think about the best use of resources and how you can get the answer. So some of it, to your question, was intelligence-led. And there are different types of crime. So you have proactive crime and reactive crime. A murder is a reactive crime. There's a dead body. Who is it? how did it happen, where did it happen, what we used to call the 5 WH, who, what, why, where, when, and how. Those are the questions, the 6 things you're seeking to answer.
Is it like a time sensitive? So when somebody gets murdered, right, is there like a window where if it's not solved within that period of time, it becomes harder? Or does it not matter?
Yeah, no, of course it matters. It's what we used to call the golden hours. So the first 24 to 48 hours. And it's not rocket science, because if you think about it, if a murder took place outside here in Piccadilly Circus...
You know what's going to happen, don't you?
Yeah.
You're going to go, the Podfather did it.
Yeah. Witnesses are there and moving through the area. So some of them will be back the next time at the same day because they're routine travellers. But the longer you leave it, the less chance you've got of tracing those witnesses. Forensic evidence will deteriorate because of weather, depending on where it is, and so forth. So yeah, it's what we call the golden hours, and that's when you've got to hit the ground running. And the UK are very good. I mean, when I was at the Met, our detection rate nationally for homicide was 94, 96%.
Wow.
If you go to America, it would be something like 6 or 8, 10%. They have a different methodology where 2 detectives will, manage a caseload, whereas in the UK we have the major incident team model where, you operate with a sergeant and 6 detectives in a pod and an inspector that looks after 3 or 4 of those teams. So you could bring to bear a massive amount of resources very quickly to hit the ground running. And we found that was a great model to operate. And then, of course, they can go back to the cases they're currently investigating or other cold cases or new cases as they come in. But you have the ability to swell the number of people very quickly to hit the ground running, and that makes a huge difference. I found all of that fascinating. The forensic side, it was fascinating. And teaching senior investigating officers that they were... he or she was responsible for the investigation of the crime, and they shouldn't be outsourcing it and relying on the scientist or the scenes of crime officer or the pathologist. They were all working for him or her, and the senior investigating officer should go to the post-mortem, should go to the scene of the crime, and should understand the technology that's being used in the major incident room, because they're responsible for doing it. And if they don't understand it, and this is one of my worries today, is that we've got direct entry detectives, and nothing wrong with that. Some of them are going to be much brighter than me and do a good job. But if you've not done the job, I think it's much harder, because you're being asked to do things that, one, you don't know whether you're being misled by people because you've never done it yourself.
I suppose that's the biggest danger, isn't it? That you rely on a scientist or whatever, and you don't really check it, and then some people make mistakes, right? So.
Exactly, and the scientist may not understand the context. If it hasn't been explained properly, they will do exactly what you ask them to do, and of course that may not. If you haven't been to the scene of the crime and you don't understand, I've been to the scene of a crime before where there's a bloodied knife lying in the scene of the crime that's obviously been used for the murder. And the scenes of crime guy's telling me he'll get to it on Tuesday or Wednesday, 2 days later, because he's got this grid search. And I'm going, no, I want it today. Yeah. And
like you said, you need to be there, otherwise
it's your inquiry, not his. And he will go through he's got his own methodology, but that methodology may not tie in with what I want. So I think I found that really fascinating, was to help the development and training of other people.
That rumor, I had a rumor, and I don't know if it was in a movie or somebody told me, or maybe I read it in a paper. But I know when there was a lot of organised crime, hits or murders, they actually, the people just disappeared. And obviously if somebody disappears, how would you sort of investigate that? I mean, because obviously if somebody rings up and says, my husband didn't come home last night, my wife hasn't come home last night, and there's no body, and you don't find the body, what happens in those scenarios is...
Well, those are what we call no-body investigations are very difficult.
That's what it says on the tin.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Because, we had that one last year, didn't we, where the lady fell into the river.
I remember.
And disappeared, and of course, initially there was no body until they eventually did find the poor unfortunate lady. So yes, you have a different methodology for dealing with a no-body murder. The first thing you have to establish is whether there was motive, and it does look like it's foul play, because of course if you haven't got the body, you haven't got somebody with a dagger stuck in them saying that's a murder. So is what we refer to, as I say, as reactive crime. We talk about proactive crime, which is, chasing people. So kidnaps is a proactive crime because it's happening. It's what we call a crime in action. And you need a different skill set to deal with a crime in action than from a reactive crime, because the decision making is faster. But a no-body murder is also one where you need to have both proactive and reactive skills, because you may be reactively trying to establish the last movements of this. Let's say it's a lady, so you're asking for people to collect CCTV, to do cell site analysis on telephones, to seek witnesses. But the proactive side might be you suspect somebody of being involved, so you're proactively arranging surveillance or technical capability against them and monitoring their phones. And, so there's a combination of two sets of skills of both reactive and proactive and crime in action, the different types of crime. And they require different skill sets, and not everybody possesses all of those skill sets. And there's no dishonor in saying, look, I'm the best Sherlock Holmes detective in the world around homicide in a body that lies still. But if you're asking me to track down, a stronghold with hostages in it, and put money on the road and be responsible for that ransom if it goes missing, that's not for me. That's not the skill set. So sometimes it's trying to find and balance the skill set and knowing who your people are that you can call on.
Yeah.
That's how most police forces operate.
Do you find that they're a lot harder to investigate, though, those particular ones, when there's nobody? Just because
they are, because and of course there's two different types. There's a nobody where somebody has put their hand up and said Fred or Mary's missing, and you know that you're investigating a missing person who you think may have been killed. And experience has taught us that you have to treat a missing person as if it was a homicide, because if you don't, and you don't apply the logic of a homicide investigation, then the golden hours go and you'll miss a lot of the evidence. So you have to hit the ground running. So, one of the things I do at the moment, Terry, I haven't touched on this with you, but I'm patron of a charity called Murdered Abroad. And that's run by a wonderful lady called Eve Henderson and her team. Eve lost her husband in a homicide abroad a number of years ago, and she set this charity up, which is to help UK families who have lost somebody in a homicide abroad. So their mother, father, daughter, brother's gone to Spain, China.
Is that a regular occurrence then?
There's probably 30 or 40 a year where people go abroad and get killed. Some of them, of course, will turn out not to be homicides. And then, of course, there's a whole issue with road deaths where people get killed in a road death. But, of course, the difference is if you're murdered in Essex, Kent, or even in Somerset, you will get a senior investigating officer appointed, you'll get a family liaison officer appointed, and you'll be given support. The family will be given support all the way through the investigation. And although that can vary, it's generally very good, and we're really world leaders at that. If your loved one's murdered abroad, you'll get somebody from the foreign consular office who will get the police to pass a death message to tell you that Fred or Harry or Mary's dead. And then, of course, you've still got the same impact to the knock at the door. It doesn't matter whether they were killed in the high street where you live or killed in China. You've still got a loved one dead abroad, and you need practical things like, how do I get the body back? How do I arrange a coroner's inquest? What's happening with the investigation? Because nobody's going to come and tell me. And so Murdered Abroad, we try to provide that support to families. And I also undertake now to try to work with police forces around the world to try to stimulate those investigations where they may not have, been doing the right thing. And so the reason that I'm mentioning this is because when you mentioned a no-body murder, this young lady from Hampshire, an ex-air hostess who went to find her life abroad and set up life, a lady called Sarm Heslop, who went abroad and was working in the Virgin Islands, the American Virgin Islands, living on a boat with her boyfriend, a guy called Ryan Bain, an American citizen. And he contacted the police in the early hours of one morning and said, my anchor alarm's gone off. I've woken up on the catamaran, this big catamaran that they charter out, and she's not here. All her stuff's here, but I don't know where she is. And they go, oh, well, you better ring the Coast Guard. So about 11 o'clock the next morning, he rings the Coast Guard, who turn up. Allegedly, he's been drinking heavily overnight, and he refuses them entry onto the boat. And so he's literally allowed to sail off into the sunset with this, what we would have said was a crime scene potentially, and should have been searched. And the Americans will say, well, there wasn't probable cause and we couldn't get a search warrant. And, well, did you ask him? Did you actually try? Did you do anything to detain him? And so today her body's never been recovered, and the family are completely in pieces because they've got no body to even bury or to grieve over. And the investigation has been appalling by the American Virgin Island Police. And I've offered to go there to help and to speak to the major investigation team and to at least try and get some answers for the family. And up to now, it's been a very difficult situation. So no body murders are very difficult, but that's a classic example of where the right things weren't done at the time. And now with the passage of time, 2 years later, the chances of finding any forensic evidence on that boat are very slim, but you still want to look.
Yeah.
Because there might be blood on there. There might be something on there.
Well, I mean, I'm not a police officer, but it does sound highly suspect.
Well,
yeah. I woke up and my ankle alarm was going off. My wife's not here.
Yeah.
My girlfriend,
girlfriend. And so, and nobody's even questioned him and asked him about it. This is a guy who's got a conviction for assaulting his previous ex-wife and breaking her jaw, and he served time in prison. So he's got a history of violence with women and a mercurial temper. And his ex-wife has been on, I'm telling you stuff that's on the internet. If you look,
that's what's great because people
up,
can do their own research. Yeah.
And if you look Sarm Heslop up, you will find this. And so things like that, I can tell you how I got involved with this was when I was a chief superintendent in Avon and Somerset, and I was on the Homicide working group nationally. I was asked to come to London to do a talk to what was then called the Society Against Murder and Manslaughter Abroad, SAMA. It's now Murdered Abroad. And so I thought, I'll come to London, I'll do a couple of hours, tell them how good we are. I'll go and get a bit of shopping, and then I'll go back home to Bristol. On a Saturday this was. And I got there to this meeting in a hotel, and at 7:00 at night, I was still there with my ears bleeding from the stories that these families were telling me, saying, please help us, we need assistance. And some of these were notable cases that, we know about, and, I got involved with the Madeleine McCann job and other areas when I was in the job. And so I've stayed engaged with this charity since I've left. And it's just appalling because you get this situation where British people are murdered abroad quite regularly, and you're in the hands of the Portuguese, Spanish, the Chinese, the Korean, wherever your loved one was, and it's very difficult. And the impact is still the same to a family, whether they're killed in Kent or killed in Korea.
Do you think when you
still lost somebody?
Do you think when you're abroad though, the people that are, whether it's Spanish, whether it's Chinese, do you think they're that bothered, or do you think they treat it as seriously as if it was one of their own?
Well, I don't know if they treat it seriously as one of their own, and I have had some examples. I mean, I dealt with one where a lad in Bristol was stabbed in the eye with a snooker cue in Tenerife, and he came home and later died from his injury. So we investigated it as a murder. He died in the UK. But, I'll be quite honest, when we went to see the chief of police in Tenerife, just hooligan tourists that were out here and, deserve what they got. They were in a fight. So, well, that's not the way we treat it. One, that's not necessarily the case because he was attacked by a guy, it turned out to be a Russian guy. And in the end, we were able to get that guy convicted and get an international arrest warrant. But, these are difficult jobs. But if somebody doesn't take the time to investigate them or take ownership of it, we were lucky with that one because the guy was back in the UK, so we had the ownership of it. If he died in Tenerife, it would have been a murder abroad, and you'd have been at the hands of the Tenerife police, who in that particular case were going,
And when you said about obviously the evidence, what is the? Is there something? Literally, if people do carry out something like that, if they know what they're doing, I take it. Now it must be harder to murder somebody now and get away with it than ever, because with the cell site analysis, with the CCTV, with the DNA, everywhere you look, there's a camera or there's a, as the murder, I know the murder rate probably hasn't gone down in England, but I take it the convictions are probably just as high as when you was in the job or higher.
I think they're going down a bit as well. But see, there is a bit of a myth about this. Most murders are committed by somebody who knows the victim. So that's the first point. And probably 60%, 70% of murders are what we call category C. That's where the offender is either immediately known and to hand, or is known but has run off. Husband that stabbed the wife, or the wife that stabbed the husband. So what we call domestic murders. I mean, it's a dreadful phrase, but that's what we call a category C crime, where the offender is either known or suspected. Then you have a category B, which is where you've got, somebody who's been murdered and is going to take some work to identify the offender, but there are some leads. Or a category A, where it's somebody who's high profile, or it's a child, or there is no immediate offender known, and they're the more difficult ones. We talked earlier about the Essex boys. So the Essex boys would be a cat A murder, because you've got these people who have been killed in a horrific way. There's no immediate suspect. There's lots of chatter and lots of rumour, but there's no immediate suspect, and it's going to be a difficult one to solve. So it's about applying the correct resources at the correct speed and being able to process that. But the majority of murders can be dealt with quite quickly, and it's only when you get cases like Fred West in Gloucestershire, where he'd murdered, I can't remember now, 10 or 11 girls. Yeah. But none of them, they were all reported missing from home, but none of them were suspected of having been murdered. It was only after his children had disclosed to social services about the abuse and that mummy and daddy had been doing things to people in the basement, they went in and dug it up and they found them, and then they found other bodies. So none of them were missing, believed dead. They were just missing from home. And there are thousands of people missing from home.
Because he was in Bristol, wasn't he?
He was in Gloucestershire.
Oh, Gloucestershire, right. Yeah, so Fred and Rose West, obviously notorious serial killers. Yeah. That Madeleine McCann thing, I think for any parent that's ever gone away on holiday, that's probably the worst nightmare, that your daughter gets, or son, gets kidnapped. That Portuguese police officer wrote a book, and he basically pointed the finger, didn't he, and said who he thought was. But then now they're saying that there's some DNA, and they're saying that
German guy,
is it Christian Bruckner?
Yeah. So my view, and I was involved in some of this, and again, there's a whole other politics around this. Because, murder abroad, as I say, the police have got no nexus. It's down to the Portuguese police. But at that stage, Leicestershire police decided to get involved initially because the McCanns lived in their area. I think Matt Baggett was the chief constable there, and he decided he was going to help the family. So you got this postcode lottery. It happens somewhere else. Your son's killed in Spain or China, and they go, it's nothing to do with us. Speak to the Foreign Office. And then along comes the Madeleine McCann job, and something happens, or the Lucy Blackman job that happened in Wales, where the Welsh police got involved, and she was killed in.
That Madeleine McCann case was probably the most high profile, and it's still not been solved, has it? I know they said that they've got the guy and the DNA, but it's a
classic example of nobody murder, where clearly because she's a child, you have to suspect straight away that there's foul play here, unless she's wandered off and gone off a cliff, and that clearly wasn't the case. And it's a clear example of the right things not being done at the right time. So they didn't treat it seriously. They didn't use the golden hours to collect the evidence they should and assess all of the evidence that should have been, to retain all of the cell site data for that area that was going to, because if you haven't retained it, it'll eventually be gone. The telephone companies get rid of it after 12 months or whatever period they decide to keep it. So there's a lot that the reviews have gone back. The Met Police did a review of it, and there are others who have done reviews of it now, and then the Germans have come up with this angle with the guy. So I do not for a moment think it was the McCanns who did it. I think they've gone through enough pain of putting themselves through it. We left her alone for a period of time, but I don't think for a moment, and never did, think it was them. But it will be very difficult to solve now, but it will basically come down to an admission. Because a lot of the evidence will be circumstantial now. There will be very little forensic evidence. Maybe if you revisit some of the forensic evidence from Praia de Luz, from the apartment, there might be something to link this German guy to it, but at the moment it doesn't appear to be, and I'm guessing they've already revisited that more than once.
But do you think she's still alive or not, or is it difficult to say?
It's very difficult. There's a piece of work that was done by a guy called Chuck Burton, who was a detective inspector back in the 80s. And it was quite academic, and he wrote a paper and developed a thing called the Catcham database. And the Catcham database examined every child murder in the UK since, I think, about 1957. I can't remember the exact parameters. But he drew from that a number of hypotheses, which basically said that the longer that a child was missing, the more likely it was dead. So the Catchem database would suggest that Madeleine was probably subjected to whatever horrific thing she was going to be subjected to, and was then killed. And there are people like Chuck Burton have done the research on that, and of course you've got to rely on the science.
And also what you were saying earlier, it's there's no body. It's very difficult, for the McCanns to have that closure they need.
Of course it is, because they've still got to hold on to the fact that the little girl may be growing up. And of course we've had these recent cases where this kid's just come back from a commune in France that had disappeared. The 17-year-old lad that's just come back, been away for 4 or 5 years, and there are cases in America and cases in Europe where women have been held, hostage and had children with men for up to 15, 20 years and then re-emerge. So there's always the possibility, and I hope the family can hold on to that she may be out there and living the best life she can, regardless of what happened to her. But
well, let's hope that is the case. But like you said, it's like you said, when you look at the data and the science, and you'd think with the way technology is and the way things are in the world that she would have popped up by now. I mean, was it 10 years ago? Or was it longer?
No, it's more than that now. It's around about 2007. So it's 13, 16 years ago. Yeah.
That's a long time. And when you was, running the as a commander of Scotland Yard and doing these sort of homicides, what was the most horrific homicide that you've worked on? Would it be multiple people, or just the way they were killed?
First of all homicides clearly are horrific because the impact to the families. A lot of what we dealt with were domestics. A lot of what we dealt with were unfortunately young people, often from within the black community, stabbing each other. And these became difficult crimes because they wouldn't want to speak to you because there was the whole cultural issue and the whole allegations of racism and the backlog of the Stephen Lawrence investigation. And of course, the Met at that stage had its own unit, Trident, that looked, but the ridiculous thing was they dealt with black on black, as they were called. So it was a black community, a black victim and a black offender, where a gun was used. And my argument was, and still is that's nonsensical. That's just the tool that was used. The same issues apply if they didn't have a gun and they used a knife or a club or whatever it was. You've still got the same issues, the same community issues, the same trust issues with the community. And actually, the people who were best aligned to deliver that were my command, the Homicide Command, because we did it every day.
Is Trident still around now? Or?
No, I think it's now been, as I understand it, they have now disbanded it, because it was probably right at the time on the back of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, and it was before I joined the Met, but I had argued quite strongly that actually this could backfire. I felt that actually to provide an equality of service, we should be treating everybody the same, giving them the same best Rolls-Royce service. The idea was about murder prevention. How do you learn from homicide to prevent murders? And there was lots. A colleague of mine, Andy Baker, who was the head of homicide before me, Andy had done a lot of work with a team around murder prevention and had identified a number of factors. And so some of those were to do with domestic violence, some of them to do with finance, some of them were to do with cultural issues, some of them were to do with members of the gang-related killings in the community, cultural issues of people or respect issues of people carrying knives. So by tackling some of the root causes, and actually one of the biggest reductions in knife crime, death in London, is not the Met Police, it's the London Ambulance Service. It's their ability to get there and save somebody's life. Because when you look at the dark figure, the iceberg, not just the people who died, but you look at the number of people who have been stabbed, who survived, that's where a lot of the data is, because they can tell you they're still alive and they can tell you what happened. And so there's a lot of learning that can come out of that. And the question is, why are they being stabbed, and why are these people choosing to carry a knife, and how do you tackle that? So prevention of murder is a key issue. And then, of course, effective and Rolls-Royce investigation. If somebody is unlucky enough to die, that the family should get the best possible service of trying to trace the offender or offenders and get justice.
And I mean, going back to your comment about knife crime, people that I've spoken to, they're quite open about, carrying knives. And I've spoken to a few people and said, why do you carry a knife? And they've said for defence. And you sort of think, but the problem is when somebody does attack you or says, give me your shoes or give me your watch or give me your phone or whatever, and you pull that out, and they attack you and you attack them, you might end up killing them and going to jail for 30 years, you know.
Yeah, and that's the problem. It's because of the immediate availability of the weapon and the ability to do horrific injury, we end up with dead people. And of course, the other issue was, and this was again an issue we found in certain areas of mainly in the African Caribbean community, this respect issue. If somebody disrespected them or their girlfriend, they would shank them or stab them in the thigh. Because the problem with that is they never tended to kill anybody, but if they hit an artery, people bled out. Or if they missed in terms of where they were stabbing, you ended up with young people dead. And of course, 2 lives are destroyed. It's usually a young person who's been involved in the killing, there's a young person who's dead. So 2 families are devastated by it. And so, you know, there is a lot, and I know it's, again, a current topic because knife crime's gone up so dramatically, and whether that's linked to the reduction in stop and search by the police because of wokeism and political correctness and concern about losing your job, or whether it's to do with cultural issues or the development of gangs in some of these areas. I don't know because I'm not close enough to see it, but we do know it's going back up, and we do know that a lot of young people are dying, and mums are getting on the telly every day and saying more needs to be done about this, and so it does need prevention. And I listened to Mayor Khan trying to spin that. The bottom line is knife crime is up, violent crime is up in London, and it's
But the good news is he's rolled out the ULEZ.
Yeah, well, there we go.
So there's always a positive, right? But genuinely.
Well, I did write about that because I said, let's call it what it is. It should be called the pay to pollute scheme.
Yeah.
Because if you're rich and you can afford to pay, you're still allowed to drive into town and pollute.
Absolutely.
But that's what it is. It's a money raising issue.
I mean, it is, for me, bullshit. And I did actually, when I heard him, I don't know what he was on TV, and he was saying, the pollution's killing lots of people, it's giving them this, giving them that. And it's like, but like you said, as long as they pay, then that's okay. People can die.
Yeah.
And
I know the case that they quoted was that poor young girl that died and sued and won money because there was a contributory factor. And I accept that. And I accept that there's a contributory factor to climate change. But I do think what's happened is London and other local authorities, including Bristol, where I live, have jumped on the bandwagon and seen it a way of filling the coffers from shortfalls in council tax and central government funding. Let's make no mistake about it. It's a revenue-creating area. I mean, my wife got a ticket. She had a private number on her plate, on her car, and she said, I've had a speeding fine. And she said, no, I haven't. It's for the illegal spacing of my numbers on my plate. One of them's 5 millimeters out of line from a camera. So just a camera on an overbridge, ping, 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 revenue creation. Okay, people will say, you should have known better. You're an ex-cop. You shouldn't have had an illegal number plate. But isn't a number plate supposed to help you identify and memorize the vehicle? So if it says something, hers said Jessie J. So, people would say it was JE55, SYJ, but it read Jessie J. So, the spacing was wrong, £100 fine. What's that about? Revenue creation, nothing else. I mean,
I definitely think that money should be directed to solving the violence and getting the knives off. I mean, in New York, they got hold of it, didn't they? They did zero tolerance, and it was heavy-handed. But I mean,
they did. But I was at the College of Policing when a lot of that was there, and who were the two big Americans? You had the 2 American mayors. They brought, I can't remember the names now.
Was one of them Italian? Was it Rudy?
It was Rudy. It was Rudy, who's Trump's lawyer. Yeah, he was one of them, and the other guy. And they brought one of them over and made him the crime czar here.
Yeah,
under the Labour government. The problem is, first of all, they got about 50 times more law enforcement officers. I mean, the transit police in New York is probably as big as the Met Police. And so zero tolerance they could do, and they run 24-hour courts, and they were willing to lock people up. And of course, all you're actually doing is you're dealing with these low-level offenders and taking them out of circulation for a short time. So crime is suppressed, goes down, or is redirected to other areas where they're not going to get the same hassle from the police. So whether it actually truly reduces crime, I'm not convinced that was the case. And secondly, it was an Americanism that wasn't going to work here in the UK the same way. Ray Giuliani, wasn't it, or something, or his name was.
So what do you think? What do you personally think would help then, if they were serious about actually we need to tackle this now? Do you think the stop and search thing was effective?
Stop and search has definitely got a place to play in this. So the fear of being caught is another issue, because we've now got young people who don't really care. To some people, young people, prison is an alternative way of life. It's just somebody else instead of social services or teachers or somebody else telling me what to do, where to go, and when to do it. Prison's just an alternative way of life. So there's a whole issue of gangs, and the Americans have got some good stuff around gangs, and we do need to tackle more of that. But we've also got to look to, and I did hear a lady talking about this, to seeing it more as a health issue rather than just a crime issue. And so it's about dealing with some of the root causes of that. And I was brought up in Glasgow in the 1950s and 60s, so I don't buy into this. I come from a deprived area, therefore I've got to carry a knife and stab people. I just don't buy into any of that. You make your own life choices. I know that if you're living in a dangerous area, it can lead to carrying a knife to unintended consequences. But you've still got to make life choices. So I do think there's something to do with education, we've got mental health issues now like we've never had before, and the cuts in health service. And I know that Mark Rowley is trying to deal with this by saying if it's not a Met job, then we won't deal with it. And the police become the catcher's mitt for dealing with other failed issues in society. So somebody needs mental health treatment. You get veterans coming out of the army who've got PTSD and don't get the treatment. And what we end up doing is criminalising them and putting them into penal institutions, because that way they're off the street and they're out of, they're out of sight. But that's not the answer. What we've got to do is address the wider issues, including mental health, education, and effective parenting. Because unfortunately, in some sectors of society, parents just wash their hands of their kids when they become problematic and then leave it to the authorities and blame everybody else for it. Why aren't the school doing it? Why aren't social services doing it? Why aren't the police doing it? Well, because when these people do intervene, then everyone goes, this is appalling, it's a police state and we shouldn't be having people controlling us. You need a license to do pretty much everything in society today except have a child. And of course, you can have as many of those as you want or you're able to, even if you don't have the resources or the help to bring them up. And there have been some experiments in the past. So the Dunedin experiment that was done in New Zealand and Roots of Empathy that were done in Canada, which shows that if you put intensive help in, so instead of giving every young mother the same amount of a district nurse, you use the district nurse time to go and help these young mothers who don't know how to look after a baby, haven't got any support from a family, and so you put the help where it's needed. And the evidence from some of these experiments has shown that if you actually concentrate the resources on the areas where it will have the greatest effect, it will have a beneficial outcome. And in the Dunedin experiment, they found that recidivism in juvenile crime and pregnancy in young people went down dramatically when they'd put the resources in and taught them about empathy at school. So the trouble is, and I have spoken to ministers about this, is as soon as they say, well, how long does this take? Well, it's 7 to 10 years. There's a guy called Professor George Hoskins who's running a charity that looks at this. And as soon as you say to ministers or MPs it's going to take 7 to 10 years, you can see the shutters come down, because there's no gain for them in terms of a parliamentary period of being able to get a win. But actually somebody should say, well, let's do this cross-party to get to a position where we put in place longer-term solutions that may take a decade or so, because ultimately whoever the political party is in will be a winner. It'll reduce the cost on the health service, the policing, prisons, and actually lead to a better society where more people can play an active part in it.
Well, it's for the greater good, isn't it? I mean, so I agree. I mean, 100%.
Look, there is no solution. I'm not. I don't live on. I don't live in.
There's things that you can put in place to.
You've got. You can't just write off a whole society and say we're not going to deal with these. You need to. You need to take some steps, and some of that is not. Policing is the last issue. I used to say policing is the thermometer of society that tells you when things have gone wrong, and we can all point to things that should have been done differently. Whether it's in, up in the Midlands at the moment where they're looking at Rochdale, where they're looking at the inquiry where people didn't care about kids being trafficked and groomed, whether it's to do with people carrying knives and the reduction. So there's a whole range of issues that you can point the finger at. But ultimately, it's usually further back down the line in education, health, and family support. And the lack of that has led to people going off the rails.
But if you got that stuff in place and then the wheels were turned on that, and then you said, right, we're also going to now step up the policing, we're going to do the stop and search. Do you think that if they increased the sentences and actually said, if you're caught with a knife, this is what's going to happen.
Well,
do you think that would help or not?
We're supposed to have that. The legislation currently says if you're caught with a knife and you commit a crime with it, you can get you should get 5 years or you should get imprisonment. It certainly did in the 1990s and the 2000s. But the truth of the matter is judges still have the discretion on sentencing and will listen to mitigation and will make a decision whether or not to send somebody to prison. So yes, I do think the part of deterrence is the fear of being caught and the consequence then of being prosecuted for it. Because that's what kind of made me as a kid think, I don't want to get into trouble. I don't want to get in trouble with the police and I don't want to go to jail. But if those are not deterrents to you, then they're two major issues that aren't going to come into play when you're thinking about how you run your life.
There's also been something that I personally, that doesn't sit right with me with the mobile phones thing. And I think, like, I've actually seen there's been like a car accident, or there's been somebody's been run over, or there's somebody's been stabbed,
and everybody's filming it,
or the police pull somebody over,
and
they just stick a camera in their face and start, you pull me over because of
that's
this.
what they call these auditors. I hate them. You see it on social media all the time.
But I do actually
These
think
auditors,
personally there should be some law stopping that, because for me, I don't know why anybody, if I'm driving down the motorway and the cars are at a standstill, and I'm like, what is going on? And then I put up and everyone's just going like looking at the crowd. I'm like, what are you fucking looking at? Just drive. Do you know what I mean? It's like ghoulish. It's like looking,
and it is. And of course, the problem is because social media knows no geographical boundaries. A lot of the stuff that you'll see on TikTok and Instagram and all these other places are often in American states, and some of them will be, there's like 43,000 sheriff's departments or police departments in the United States, and the level of training of some of them is not as high. They're not all FBI officers, and it's not as high often as we've got in terms of the training and the temperament of people here in the UK. In general, I think we're very lucky with that. Even, with the young people coming in with degrees, I think we've got people who are much more aware, understand the law probably better than I did when I was a young cop. But they are faced, and of course, the young people in this country see what's happening with an auditor in Texas or in, Ohio, and then they imitate it over here, and they think that it's their role to try and catch the police out. And of course, one of the areas I do see in the UK, you get these idiots that go out there, I'm an auditor, I'm flying a drone, and they deliberately fly it over the top of a police station or a sensitive area, and then go, oh no, my drone only weighs 49 grams, I'm entitled to fly this year, and you don't know the law, officer, I'm going to make you look a dick on social media. Well, let me be perfectly honest, 30 years ago, he'd have got nicked to prevent a breach of the peace, and he'd have cooled his heels in the cells for 12 hours, and when he went out, he'd have thought, I may not do that again, because that's not a lot of fun. Now, that doesn't happen, and I'm not saying that was right, but there was a kind of Ways and Means Act where, the police used the law to try to have a more civil society. A lot of that is gone now because everything is so immediate and everything's on social media. And two of my sons were until recently cops. And I used to say to them, you need to understand that whatever you do will be seen by somebody immediately. It'll be on Facebook before you get back to the police station. So you must always, always think about, your behaviour and your actions when you're dealing with it. And unfortunately, that to a degree is taking away some of the ability of police to act as firmly as perhaps as society, majority of us might think they should, because they're terrified of the consequence of it and the DPS, professional standards inquiry that will come from it. And none of that, am I saying, should be about the police being able to, punch people or assault them. But what I'm saying is there were practical ways in which you could make it clear to people that the behaviour was unacceptable.
I did have a bit of a laugh with a guest earlier, and we were talking about policing, and I said when I was growing up in the 70s, if you saw a police car, you'd always stand up straight, because you was always worried that they was going to stop you, even if you was not doing anything wrong. And I remember on Air Estate, you had these sort of unruly kids that would be throwing bricks through people's windows, putting fireworks through letterboxes, beating people up, nicking people's handbags, nicking stuff out the corner shop. They were just stabbing people's tyres. And I remember the police would just literally come, roll them up in a thing, take them to the police station and give a good hiding, and then drop them back. And I know that's obviously frowned upon now, but back then it did actually stop people.
It was always, I think, we used to say, when people go scrumping apples, but no, look, I was a kid, I grew up in Glasgow, we used to throw fireworks in people's garden and do all of that. We were little tearaways. But what used to happen was the local police would find out about it and they go and tell your father, and your father would give you a box
you
around
get
the
beaten,
ears.
yeah.
You go, I'm not going to. Yeah. So, but so it's responsible parenting, as they call it. It's what the academics call the absence of a capable guardian. So if a child has an absent capable guardian, used to be the male figure, nowadays, of course, it can be anybody, then the child may go awry if they're not corrected and given discipline. And of course, the police had a part to play in that. But increasingly, the police are being asked to do more of that, but have less ability to do it because of the whole issue of, wokeism in society, which, it just fills me with terror. And
I was again. This is the topics that come up a lot on this podcast: the wokeism and knife crime. Yeah. But I sort of don't understand why. Like for me, looking at the UK right now, like you said, the violence is up, the crimes are up, the knife crimes are up. There's obviously issues that need to be covered and resolved. And this woke thing seems to have taken the pole position. It seems to be very important. And
it can also become, and I'm guilty of doing it just now, haven't I? It can also become something that I think we use. I think what we're seeing is society is more connected now than ever. News is more immediate. There's less tolerance for authority figures to use their authority, and we can call that wokeism or civil rights or civil liberties. But and wokeism has become a euphemism for anything we don't like, which seems to be against the norms of give them a clip round the ear and move on. So I think there's still a balance. I think what's happened, the pendulum swung too far one way, and it is on the way back. And a lot of people that we talk to are saying, let's get back to some kind of common sense. We're not suggesting the police should be brutes and assault our children, but what we do want them to do is to be present. We want them to take action, and we want them to have power to be able to take it and feel empowered to take that action. And I think a lot of cops today don't feel that. They're worried about the consequence of what they do in a discipline inquiry or somebody second-guessing them. And it means that they become less, if you like, vocal in demonstrating their authority on the street.
Yeah, because also when I was obviously researching you, David, I noticed that you did a little bit as a hostage negotiator as well. That must have been was that mainly where people were being kidnapped, or was it?
It was a combination. So the doctrine of hostage negotiators here in the UK, and this again is what I mentioned earlier. You can deal with reactive crime or proactive crime. So a kidnap is a crime in action. It's happening, and the ability to make decisions either as a senior investigating officer or a hostage negotiator are a different set of skills than dealing with a dead body, because you're not in control. If it's a proper hostage situation, it's a gang kidnap or it's a proper kidnap.
What was the most common sort of things that you dealt with when you was doing that?
So I also dealt with a number of the overseas kidnaps where terrorists had kidnapped British citizens abroad. Alan Johnson, the BBC reporter, Margaret Hassan. My role was to sit in Cobra with the government, and you'd have all these very important people around the table, Foreign Secretary, Home Secretary, SAS, and military and Foreign and Commonwealth Office and everybody, so that ministers could then be given the best possible advice. But ultimately, the hostage negotiation, if it involved that, would be down to the Met Police to send negotiators abroad or to do the negotiation remotely. And so we managed the negotiation, and others would be then interested in trying to find the solution, whether it was going to be attacking the stronghold. And we have a phrase in policing that negotiators negotiate, commanders command. So I could maybe turn up as a superintendent negotiator, and there might be an inspector who's in command of the incident. He or she is still in command of the incident. I am there to be the negotiator, not to take command of the incident, because the negotiators are often kept in the dark in terms of what the strategy or the tactics are going to be, because what you don't want to do is end up leaking those, that information to the kidnappers in the stronghold, if that's what you're dealing with. So there were some cases there that were really tense and difficult, but the majority of British police hostage negotiators are involved in suicide intervention. The majority of the call-outs in regional police forces are to people with mental health issues who have climbed a crane, gone on a cliffside, tried to commit suicide, or and of course the problem with that, which I think is one of the issues Mark Rowley's trying to deal with in the Met, is to say, well, look, it can't be for us every Friday to go out and see Johnny sitting on the edge of this cliff because the mental health service said he's not mad and they let him go. If he's going to go back on the cliff and tie up resources, we can't keep doing that. We need to have different interventions that we do it once, and we realise that. And you did get a number of occasions where you were dealing with the same people over and over again, people who were in crisis. And so hostage negotiation is hostage and crisis negotiation. You're dealing with people, and it's about trying to understand, and the training develops your skills to try to understand. So is this person having, a mental health episode? Are they psychotic? Are they delusional? Or, and you don't have to enter into it. You don't have to agree there's an elephant in the room, but you can understand that they think there is, and you have to deal with it from that way. And, it's quite odd, really, because being a hostage negotiator is contrary to everything you're taught as a police officer, which is to take control. Because actually you're not in control, the hostage taker is, or the person who's in crisis is, and it's about how you change that to actually allow other people to take that control back again.
Did you have a well-known, is there any big cases that you did other than the ones with the terrorist organisations?
No, because I think the majority of mine were cases that involved people in crisis with mental health. We've had a couple of siege situations where somebody's, held their children at knife point because the wife won't let them out of custody, and those are quite tense situations because you've got, in the role of the hostage negotiator is to buy time for tactical commanders to make a decision, and the primary emphasis is to save the life of the hostage. Money doesn't matter and property doesn't matter. It's about how you secure the lives of the hostages, and you have to stick to those principles. So I was very lucky. I did that for about 11 years.
And if you had an incident where somebody had kidnapped their kids or for whatever reason, or kidnapped anybody, and there was going to be a high chance that they are going to start actually killing people, would you then just use would you just basically, do they shoot to kill them or to wound them?
So, the classic example of this, and they trained this on the hostage negotiation course, was when David Viness, who was in the Met, he was a hostage negotiator at the time of the Iranian embassy siege. And that's where the role of the hostage negotiator is to talk and to build a rapport with the hostage takers and to buy time to allow the commanders to make a decision that if things are going wrong, they've got a tactical plan for an emergency response or an immediate response to go through the door to try and save the life of the hostages. And you've got there's a very, I think it's in the public domain now, where David's talking to them about whether they want, pepperoni on their pizzas and how they should deliver them and what size boxes they should be in. And the guy's going, wait a minute, I can hear a noise. And he's going, no, don't worry about that. It's just, let's talk about the pizza and what have you. And of course, it's the SAS coming through the window.
Rusty Furman, who was the guy with no gloves.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know Rusty.
No, I don't.
But he's got the most famous hands in the SAS. And he actually said that he was watching a darts game, and when he got the call, he had to go, and he didn't have time to get his gloves. But he talked about that, and he actually said on that actual siege, when they did the go, they hadn't said it, and one of the guys went through a window. Somebody else got burnt.
That's right, from the explosive charge.
It was pretty.
Well, I had a mate who was on that, guy called John McAleese, who unfortunately is dead now. But John was in the commanders with me, and he went to the SAS, and he was one of the guys on the balcony. But so there are tense moments. But the idea is the hostage negotiator shouldn't be involved in that, because what you don't want to do is emotionally leak and say, unintentionally warn them that something's happening. So the less information you have, kept in the dark and fed on poo.
Got this amazing pizza. When they start talking about what pepperoni you want, but something's coming.
But that's the role of and there's a whole, I won't go into all the tactics of it, but there's a whole way in which you're looking to buy time. The idea of a negotiator is to buy time, keep the hostages safe, and to allow other people to find either a political or a tactical solution to it, which is outside of your purview. You may be fed things and asked to do things to get them to a particular location or to that, but the hostage negotiator should never lie. Should never be put in a position of having to lie. That was a mantra for us. You mustn't ever put a hostage negotiator in a position of lie, because they may have to rebuild that rapport. And if you've lied to them, then it's not going to happen. So it's I mean, I had a great time. I had 30 years at the cops. I had a fantastic time. I wouldn't change a bit of it, even the bits where some things didn't go as well as I'd hoped. But yeah, it was a great career, and I hope and I thank the young men and women who go out there every day and put themselves in harm's way of doing it today. I hope they have as much fun as I did, and along the way, help people in their lives and reduce crime.
And when did you, with the GCHQ stuff, was that after you left the?
Yeah. So I mean, I'd worked with the intelligence agencies as you do on counter-terrorism stuff and on national security operations and on some of the kidnaps. Where British people have been kidnapped abroad in Gaza or Iraq or wherever it may have been. And again, it was one of these. Somebody approached me and said, "Look, would you? I hear you might be leaving policing. You've done your period. You're coming up to retire from policing. Would you like to come and work with us?" And so I had a very interesting sort of 9 years or so working for GCHQ, mainly based here in London, providing technical support to policing, customs and revenue, and the 3 intelligence agencies, which involved the interception of telephones. And it was an interesting period. It was working around the whole development of encryption, so things like WhatsApp, Skype, Telegram, Signal, all these encrypted applications now, which means that the communication is encrypted. So it's very difficult for the authorities to listen to the content of it. In the good old days, you put crocodile clips on a telephone line and you could listen to if you had a warrant. But a lot of people don't understand, first of all, interception of communication in the UK can never be used in evidence with a very small set of circumstances around coroner's courts, but it can never be used in evidence. So if somebody says, "I buried the body under the oak tree," you can't play that in court and then say, "We found the body under the oak tree." You're not allowed to use the evidence derived from an intercept. And in fact, you're not allowed to even infer that there was intercept in the evidence. That's a criminal offence.
Wow. So you're not so if
it's intelligence. It's an intelligence function.
Got it. And does that apply to the public as well? So if anybody had whether they tapped your phone or whether they actually recorded you saying something, that's never admissible.
No, it can be if it's recorded, if it's on a phone, but it's illegal for anybody to interfere with a public telecommunication system.
Got it.
This is what the whole issue about the hacking inquiry was about.
So the hacking was when was that similar to essentially what the intelligence services?
I have a different view. I mean, they've said that was illegal intercept. As I understand it, what was happening there was Prince Charles would be given a mobile phone, and he would use it to do what a mobile phone does. But what he wouldn't be told was that it came preset with 4 zeros on the as the PIN code for the voicemail. And so, of course, because he can't answer his phone because he's waving out the car to a lot of people, he gets a lot of voicemails from people. And what some journalists had worked out you could do, because in the day, some companies like Vodafone, all you had to know was the number to dial up your voicemail, and it would ask you to input your PIN code. So if you knew Prince Charles's number, you could dial that up into the telecommunication provider. It would ask you to put in your PIN code, and if you haven't changed it, and it was still 4 zeros, then you could listen to their voicemails. So there's a question as to whether that's an intercept of a communication. Arguably it is if it's still on the public telecoms network, and the owner of the phone hasn't listened to it, then it's a message which is still in the course of transmission, so it would be an illegal intercept. And that's what the argument was. But that's how they were doing it. It wasn't there were some, as I understand it, that also did use some technical capability by downloading malware onto phones, but the majority of them was just using poor security by a lot of people who were handed a phone, whether you were a pop star or minor royal, and you didn't, all you did was use it. You didn't know anything about the security on it. So it was poor handling. So there was that side of it. But of course, the world's changed now because people use encrypted applications, and the collection of intelligence is much more difficult and much more complex. And, after Edward Snowden made his big revelation in America, that, contractor that told what the NSA and GCHQ and everybody were doing, there was a huge review here in the UK, And the legislation, which was the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act of 2000, was updated with the Investigatory Powers Act of 2017. And I was still in government working on that when they developed that. And the idea was to make a more transparent understanding. So Lord Anderson, who was a very clever barrister who the government had relied on matters of counter-terrorism, he led a review in this. And the idea was to give people more of a transparent understanding of what the intelligence and the police agencies could do, but understanding that there was a very strict regime. So to intercept somebody's telephone in the UK, you need a Secretary of State to sign a warrant. It's not a police officer can't sign it, or an intelligence officer. It has to go to the Home Secretary or to the Secretary of State for Scotland and Northern Ireland.
I mean, that's quite
every single case, and they have to review every single case and agree to it. And there's a whole back office that supports that. But, make no mistake, it is treated very seriously, and it can't be used in evidence. It is only intelligence. Ironically, the UK can carry out intercept for foreign government and provide it as evidence abroad, but we can't use it in our own court. And, there's a big debate. There's always been a big debate about what they call intercept as evidence. Should it be used as evidence? The truth is, in most cases, when you're dealing with drugs, gangs and things, they talked in code anyway. And if you try to introduce that, the defence would argue when he said bring the doves to the location, he was talking about the doves that he breeds, not the ecstasy or whatever. So they talked in code, and so a lot of it was about really switched on cops or intelligence officers understanding the patter and what was being said and being able to use it to make sure they were in the right location at the right time to catch them, and use classic evidence of hands-on catching them with the guns, the drugs, or whatever it was. So that was interesting, and it was a great opportunity for me to be a part of that and to work nationally and internationally in helping to develop some of the legislation and the technology which keeps people safe today.
With all the technology now, and again, I mean, a little bit like what you were saying earlier about the heel prick, and then gathering the the stuff and to prevent the stuff. And then obviously there's a database that may be able to be accessed at some point if they pass some sort of thing. Is that the same with telecommunications? I mean, do they literally every email, every phone call, that it's on a server somewhere, so that they've got that on, so that they've literally got the data? So
yeah, well, that's part of the big debate in the Investigatory Powers Act. If you ever want to read it, and anybody wants to read it, it will tell you very clearly what the government can and cannot do. And so telecommunications data, which is, if you think about it, like if you write a letter to me, the letter is the content, and I need a Home Secretary's warrant to allow me to read the content. In fact, that applies to mail as much as to telephone calls, so it's a good example. But the envelope, which might tell me where it's been posted, and a frank mark that tells me when it was posted and all that. So the communications data can be applied for by a senior police officer and or an intelligence officer, and this has been the case since the 1960s, 70s, and then, of course, through the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act in 2000. And interesting, the reason we had to have a Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, RIPA, in 2000 is because we adopted the human rights legislation then, and it meant that where we'd previously operated on senior police officer ACPO codes of practice, the Human Rights Act said you couldn't do that. You had to have primary legislation in place. So RIPA was designed to make us ECHR compliant. And then, of course, as technology galloped ahead with the development of the internet from 2000, I mean, Facebook wasn't around then, and Telegram and all these things. But as technology went ahead, RIPA was being further and further tested and developed. And the argument is that maybe it got out of step and the intelligence agencies had to do things that were no longer covered by the law. I don't think that is the case personally, but the idea of the Investigative Powers Act was to renew the legislation to take account of emerging technology and to make it more transparent. And I think it's done a really good job, and all credit to Mr. Anderson and his report that made that possible. And although my colleagues in the intelligence service wouldn't say it, all credit to Mr. Snowden for having been the forcing catalyst that made that happen. Because without it, we would probably still be trying to expand this creaking legislation here and in the US under the Patriot Act. And
And obviously people talk about encrypted apps, they talk about encrypted phones, but in reality, there isn't really anything that is encrypted or
again, I'm not giving away state secrets here. The methodology is now different. So in the good old days, you could go to the Home Secretary and say, I'm looking at this Terry Stone, he's a bad chap, and here's a case, and I can prove to you.
He's doing this Criminal Connection podcast.
And we'd like a warrant to intercept his communications, Home Secretary.
Right.
So we can listen to what he's saying.
Yeah.
And we would go to the telephone company and say, here's a warrant, we want you, and you're not allowed to tell Mr. Stone that we're investigating him or that we're intercepting it, and we want to listen to this. And arrangements would be put in place, and I was responsible for doing the technical arrangements to make that happen across the UK. And then when encryption came, BT and all the other big telephone companies would say, well, don't come and shout at us, because all we can do is collect the data, and it's coming from what we call an over-the-top service provider, Google, Facebook, Telegram, and they've encrypted it. So what you're going to listen to is encrypted voice or encrypted data transmission, and we don't have the keys to decrypt it. You can't make us do it. If you want that, you're either going to have to go to the company and tell them to do it, and they'll go, we're in America, we're not covered by your law, we're not going to do that. So that was my role, was to work with those companies to try to find a solution that allowed us to find a way of being able to overcome some of that, where there was, a clear case made here, and there was proportionality, justification, and, important people and the Secretary of State had agreed there was a need to do this for the. There are only 3 reasons you can intercept somebody's communications: for national security, a threat to the economic well-being of the state, which is linked to national security, or to investigate serious and organised crime. They're the only 3 reasons you can do it. So you have to make a case in each case to do that. And the communications data, which is at a slightly lower level, can be obtained. But to go back to your question, yes, the telecoms companies hold that data, but under European law, they will only hold it for a maximum of 2 years. And it's like a big sea of zeros and ones in data. It means nothing to anybody unless you actually go and say, I'd like to see the communications data for this telephone number or that IP address on the internet or whatever it may be. But if you don't know that, and of course the European law was trying to make that 6 months. And after the 7/7 attacks, we said, no, absolutely not. We need the data kept for 2 years. Because what we want to know is not when the bomb went off on the 7th of July.
It's all the stuff
we want to know what happened 6 months before and who they were in contact with, or 12 months before, or 18 months before. And if you haven't had law that allowed the telecoms companies to retain the data, it won't be there when you go back and ask for it. So after a period of time, that data will be, because nobody can store all the data forever, it goes. So your question is there a big database somewhere that collects it all and does all that? The answer to that is no. Because there are some people in America and other countries who will collect versions of the internet every day and keep, because it varies, it changes every day, and they will keep that. But there's still a finite time in which they can keep.
When I was saying that, what I meant, I didn't mean, the British government had a. But what I meant was like if you was BT or you was O2 or you was Facebook, then they will have that data, won't they? So
only for 2 years, and then they have to get rid of it unless they've been told by somebody in government to retain it for a specific investigation. Wow. Yeah, so the data is gone.
I never knew that. I'm fascinated by it because you sort of it's also interesting to see how because obviously people there's a big thing about privacy, isn't there? Everyone wants to use this app because it's privacy or send a message on, and there's been like loads of stuff in the papers about Facebook saying, they're encrypting their messages, and obviously it's stopping law enforcement bringing these people that are, trying to meet up with younger, grooming children and stuff on online. So
that is an issue. These are encrypted applications. And unless you're invited into those groups, then you can't actually see or hear what they're saying. So there are other ways in which, because this is becoming difficult, and again, the Investigative Powers Act covers this, so the police and the intelligence agencies with the correct warrant in place and the correct application under the Investigative Powers Act can obtain a warrant that allows them to either put malware onto the device so they can get access to it, or to find other ways in which they can reach into the device, because you can either collect it from the service provider if you can get them to assist you, or you can collect it off the device, or you can ask the target. But if the target, you don't want them to know that you're looking at him, then you're not going to ask him. you know, there are ways in which
can I just put this on your phone, please?
But it's an arms race, because for every time, and I mentioned this earlier, you know, law enforcement can never keep up with changing technology. We're always catching up, and the legislation always has to catch up. That's happening with cryptocurrency and the police's ability to deal with technical crimes that are happening. And this is happening every time there's a new application. Somebody develops something, and because of privacy. And of course, the majority of it is driven by American companies. They're all based in Silicon Valley or California. And the view of it's a cultural issue, because the view of the American people about federal government is hugely different to the majority, I would say that, of people in the UK who say, I don't really care what the authorities know about me if it's done, because I'm not doing anything wrong. The view in America is the federal government is the devil, he's the beast, and therefore should never have access to anything. So, and of course, because we're dealing with those American companies and we're saying, but we're nice British, you know, you can tell us, they're going, no, you know, you're still a federal government, we're not allowed to tell you. So, you know, the kind of, you know, there's kind of, I suppose, the kind of people who've developed these applications are all kind of liberal California people who have got a different view of the world, you know, and don't see that there is evil. And there are still some cases that I can't talk about, where we were able to go to some of these companies and say, because you didn't do this, we can tell you that some people died either from, you know, one country or another. And they go, okay, well, what do you need? Because they realise that's not what they don't set out to do evil or to do harm, but when it's sometimes difficult for them to understand why we need that data. But it is an arms race, and increasingly, you know, law enforcement and intelligence agencies, I mean, we should be so proud of what they do in terms of keeping the UK safe, because there are, you know, and my senior colleagues, the head of MI5 and MI6 and GCHQ, go on the TV sometimes and say, we've stopped, you know, X number of terrorist attacks, and that's happening every day, because their role is to prevent. Yes, there comes a stage of reactive crime, you know, and a terrorist attack is just mass murder by another name. It's still a crime. And yes, we're very good at retrospectively investigating that and trying to find the bad guys. But the idea is to stop it. And you need access to that intelligence and the ability to deal with that before it becomes a major incident.
And I suppose a lot of the stuff that happens is, you know, if they're not going to put in the papers, oh, we want to pat on the back, we just stopped another terrorist attack. It's just swept under the carpet. But it's I mean, it's,
and sometimes the police have, you know, some of my colleagues have been a bit too clever for their own good, you know, because they're going out. Like, there was one case a few years ago which had a lot of publicity called the Silk Road, where a lot of, you know, illegal drugs and goods were being sold on the, you know, the dark web.
Well, you could hire a hitman, you could buy drugs. Yeah, it was all done with Bitcoin, wasn't it? So I remember reading about it.
And of course, the police, I think it was SOCA, as it then was, a serious organised crime agency, were given some access. I won't go into what that was, but they were, you know, that previously had been within federal agencies in the US or intelligence community, and they were given access to this.
This was on the dark web.
Yeah. Right. And so they were able to arrest a lot of people and dismantle the Silk Road. But what happened was somebody from SOCA decided to go on the telly and talk about it, about how clever they'd been and what they'd done. And it meant that equity, that capability was wasted now, because bad guys now knew
don't go
what could be done. And so, you know, sometimes absolutely the best intelligence operations are the ones that we don't know anything about. But you can rest assured that on a daily basis, these teams, I genuinely believe, are keeping the UK safe, and they are unsung heroes.
Well, thanks for everybody. MI5, MI6, GCHQ, we love you.
Right.
And obviously, you got a Queen's Police Medal as well.
I did.
Was that as you was leaving, or when you were still serving?
So I got it after I'd left, but I was recommended for it. So, you know, and let me be very clear, you know, I got that on the back of lots of guys and girls who worked for me who did a really good job. You know, and I'm not being shy in saying that, but the truth is it's a team effort. the reason that perhaps senior cops get it more often than perhaps junior cops, although some junior cops get it as well, and that's fantastic, is because, of course, if it does go wrong, equally you're going to take the can for getting it wrong. So when it goes right, and it's lovely to be celebrated that way. I was very proud and very pleased, and so were my family. It was great.
And did you go to the palace?
Yeah.
Wow. And what was? I mean, obviously, Her Royal Highness is no longer.
Well, for
with
me,
us.
it was Prince Charles who gave me mine. So it's either the Queen, Prince Charles, or Princess Anne, I think, who do them now.
Right.
And
okay.
I think William's now doing it as well. And they either do them at the Palace or at Windsor. I was lucky; I got to go to the Palace.
Wow.
And it was in December. So I left in the April, and I got my letter. You're told, you can't discuss it. It's the same as a knighthood or any of the other ones. You're not allowed to discuss it. The Queen is intending to offer you this. Will you accept it? Yes, thank you very much. I'd love to. When can I come? And then it goes in mine went in the summer honours list. And then by the time they catch up and you go, it was around December when I went to the Palace.
And you met King Charles.
I met King Charles, yes.
And what did he have much to say, or was it?
Well, I mean, obviously he's brief because there are hundreds of people going through.
Wow.
And they start with the people they're giving knighthoods to, and then people they're giving OBEs to, and CGMs and all the other Cadbury's Dairy Milk and all the other stuff, and then they get to that. But his equerry will lean in his ear and go, "This is Dave Johnston," and he was until recently, I think it says on the formal Buckingham Palace thing, lately Commander in the Metropolitan Police. And he said, "Well, what do you do now?" And I said, "I'm now working at GCHQ. Your Royal Highness, it was good work, and thank you for what you're doing." And and he says a few pleasantries, shakes your hand, and you go away, and your family will get to sit in the audience and see you shake the hand, and then you get to take a picture at the palace with your medal. It was very nice. But I'm absolutely delighted I've got it. But it was a team effort, and it was based on a lot of the work that my team did for me. The 1,500 or so detectives who investigated homicide and serious crime, and 30 years of Avon and Somerset and the Met. So I was very lucky.
So obviously you got your Queen's Police Medal from King Charles, or Prince Charles at the time, and then obviously you did your stint in GCHQ, and then what happened after that? Did you just decide?
Yeah, so I think after 9 years or so there, I thought I'd quite like to go out and just try to do something else. I'd made a lot of connections in government, in government with commercial companies. I'd worked with a lot of the big defence contractors and companies. So I left and set up. I actually went to work for a couple of technology startups. A company called Blue Voyant, who are currently a large cybersecurity provider. I helped to set that up in the UK. And I stayed there for about 18 months, and then it was time for me to move on. And so I set my own consultancy up. And I work with some other ex-Scotland Yard guys now, a company called Animus Associates. And we undertake risk assessment for people in terms of business and in their private life. We deal with high net worth individuals. We carry out surveillance if it's appropriate. We do reviews of criminal cases for both defence and prosecution. And we do cybersecurity assessments, and we track and trace assets and people. And we've had lots of cases. So, for instance, we had a family recently who wanted to trace somebody in Israel because somebody was dying here in the UK, and we were able to find that person in Israel and connect them after 40 years of family, time. So it can be as simple as that, or it can be more sinister, where somebody's lost £1 million or several £1 million in a scam, and it's about trying to track those assets so that they can be recovered to their legal owners. And that's, again, increasingly the case because the police haven't got the resources to do someone was telling me the other day that
one of the big scams that's happening at the moment is people are impersonating like funds. Yeah. So like a famous hedge fund or whatever. And then they're like ringing people up and saying, "Oh, we've got this bond or whatever that pays this great yield or whatever it is," and then they send them over the actual documents on email, and it looks like it's HSBC or JP Morgan or whatever, and then they like sign up to it and then send the money, normally digitally, obviously because people don't really use checks anymore, and it goes to some sort of Mickey Mouse account, and then they run off with the money. But
yeah, and that's the same as they do with cyber. So, here's one little tip for people. So what usually happens, and of course we're seeing this becoming increasingly more complex, where they're actually turning back to the telephone, not just to the internet to do that. And they're contacting people, and they're using deep fake and AI. So they might put Terry Stone's voice on there. So somebody says, I spoke to Terry, that sounds like him. It must be from Terry.
so is that
that
good now?
Yeah, that's happening. Yeah. Or, Dad, like my son's abroad at the moment. I got a text while my son was abroad saying, Dad, this is my new number. Can you contact me urgently? And of course, your first response is to go press on the number that's been sent to you. And then I can't answer at the moment, Dad, but you need to send 500 quid because, some people are holding me and my phone, and if you send it, it'll all be okay. And some people will go, God, it's my son. Of course I'll do it. So unfortunately, these...
I suppose when you send a 500 quid, then you get another one back saying,
well, that's right.
That's $5,000 now.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, the problem with a lot of these scams is they rely on that old human weakness, greed. If it looks too good, it probably is too good, so don't believe it. And the second thing is, if somebody then says, look, you don't have to trust us on this phone call, I'll send you an email and you'll see the hyperlink in there, so you can go to, let's use HSBC.
Yeah.
And so you go, never click on the hyperlink that somebody sends you. Go on a separate Google page, on a separate browser page, and look it up yourself and put your own thing in. Because what they do is they will register a domain for, and I'm just going to use it as an example, hsbc.com. But what they do is they change the S of HSBC from sans serif to Times Roman. And that means that the computer picks it up as a different address from the original HSBC. But what you get back is a page that looks, because they've cloned the page of HSBC or Barclays or whoever it may be, or the Trust Fund or Acme, and you think that you're actually dealing with the people. So never click on a link that somebody sends you, because they may just have adjusted the font or put an extra dot in it that you haven't noticed. Because we all look at these number puzzles and they say find the number 69 in it, and you can't see it because they all look the same. And that's what they rely on, is people clicking on the link. So if you get a hyperlink sent to you and you think, don't click on it,
right.
Open your own browser and go into your own page and open your own clean page. And then if in doubt, ring the bank. And I know it's hackneyed. Nobody will ever ask you for your PIN number or information that will allow them to access your account. And if they do that, don't be fooled into doing it. And
I think there's so many, you hear about so many people that have been duped where they've rung, like that texting is a common one. I've lost my phone, or it looks like it's from your mate. And the other one is when you get emails saying, please pay the invoice, or can you look at this, or have a look at this is a great opportunity. And obviously you click on the thing, and then all of a sudden you've got ransomware on your computer or whatever. And I mean, I don't suppose there's any way of stopping it, really, is there? You just have to don't click on it, don't respond.
And be very careful.
Yeah.
And if it looks too good, it probably is. And if it's from somebody who you don't know, then be suspicious. Yeah. And just say, well, I'm sorry, I don't want to be disrespectful, but I don't know who you are. I don't know why you're ringing me. I'm going to make my own arrangements. And if it's a legitimate organisation, they'll say that's absolutely fine. But don't use a link they send you or a telephone number they give you. Look it up.
How are they gonna stop that then? With this, if they can use AI to impersonate people or make it look like people, how can the law enforcement stop that?
Well, as I said to you earlier, the problem is an arms race, because every time the police bring in a new piece of legislation or warn people, and they go out and warn people on these money programs, the criminals find a new way to do it. And AI is the new thing. They're all looking at this deep fake, and being able to make it look like somebody's face, or somebody's actually giving an interview and saying something in it, and they say, I wasn't even there, it wasn't me. And it is plausible and it looks real. I mean, there are examples of it right now on the internet where people are talking about Israel and Hamas and things, and they're saying that wasn't me, I didn't say that. And so it is an arms race. And the problem is, to the casual user, to the punter who looks at Instagram, they won't know. They'll assume it's real. But if it involves you giving up property, money, or access, or your children, don't get involved in it. Be suspicious of it, and it's better to be suspicious and apologise than it is to find out that you were too shy to. The British thing, I don't like people to think badly of me. I'll just go along with it, and then you end up being a victim. So don't be a victim, try to avoid it.
Well, that's great advice, David, and I want to thank you for coming on. It's been really interesting talking to you and hearing about your story and your words of advice. And thanks again for coming on. Really,
thank you, Terry. Good to meet you.
Thanks for tuning in to the Criminal Connection podcast. David Johnston, what an amazing guest! What an insight into worlds that I'm sure none of you have experienced, but it's always good to find out information about these things and share the love. Make sure you like, subscribe, and tell all your friends about the Criminal Connection podcast. Make sure you tune in next week because we've got another really exciting, interesting guest. Until next week, we'll see you on the other side.